Welcome to Relation Tales. Please like this video and subscribe Relation Tales. We're grateful for each and every one of you. Let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's begin. For years, I thought Lauren and I had built something real. A marriage shaped by struggle, late-night takeout dinners, and whispered promises that we'd always choose each other no matter how hard life got. She used to say I made her feel grounded, that I was the calm in her storm. But calm doesn't impress people like her for long. Once she got promoted at her firm, everything about her began to change. The way she dressed, the way she talked, the way she looked at me. Suddenly, I wasn't her partner anymore. I was her reminder of where she came from. I remember the first time I noticed it. We were in the car, heading to one of her company's weekend retreats. She was on the phone, laughing. Not the kind of laugh you give your husband, but the kind you give someone who makes you feel admired. Her voice softened when she said his name, Richard. When she hung up, I asked, "That the boss?" "Yeah," she said casually. "He just wanted to confirm the guest list." But she didn't look me in the eye. The small things piled up. Messages deleted, new perfume, late-night emails, meetings that always seemed to end after midnight. And when she got home, she'd talk about him. How charismatic he was, how driven he made her feel. I stopped recognizing the woman sitting across from me at dinner. Still, I tried. I woke up early to make coffee for her before work. I made sure the house stayed spotless. I even started cooking her favorite dishes again. She smiled less, though. The warmth in her eyes had been replaced by something distant, like she was living in a story I didn't belong in anymore. But I wasn't blind. One night, while she showered, her phone buzzed on the dresser. I glanced, not out of paranoia, but out of a sinking need to know. The message preview was short. "Same place tomorrow. I can't stop thinking about last night." And then another. "Don't forget the blue dress. You know what it does to me." Her phone lock screen lit up with Richard's initials. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because anger without direction is just noise, and I was done being noise. Over the next few days, I started noticing her patterns. She'd tell me she had late meetings every Thursday. Same time, same excuses. Always came home just before midnight. So one Thursday, I told her I was working late too. But instead, I parked 2 blocks away from her office. I waited. At 8:47 p.m., she walked out in that same blue dress. Not toward the office parking lot, but down the street, right into Richard Hayes' car. They drove off, laughing, like a couple who'd been together forever. I followed them quietly. They went to a restaurant, one we used to celebrate anniversaries in. I sat in my car across the street and watched as she leaned across the table, touching his hand, whispering like she used to whisper to me. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always feel like rage. Sometimes it just feels quiet, like watching something die and realizing you can't resuscitate it. When she came home that night, smelling faintly of champagne, she kissed my cheek. I smiled back, pretending not to notice. Because pretending was what she was good at. That's when I decided I wouldn't confront her. I'd stage her downfall. I needed one moment. One perfect moment where her own lies would bury her. So I waited. And when she invited me to her boss's formal dinner party 2 weeks later, the one where she begged me to just behave and look successful, I knew it was time. I spent those 2 weeks playing the role she expected. Loving husband, supportive partner, fool. But beneath the calm, I was watching, planning, and collecting everything I needed. Her emails, photos, texts, even a recorded call. And when the night of the dinner finally came, I was ready to give her the performance of her life. I walked into the dining room like a man who belonged there. Not because I felt comfortable, because I had decided to make it my stage. The chandeliers spilled an obscene amount of light across polished silverware. Lauren floated in, perfectly poised, every head turning as if she'd personally invented elegance. Richard made a show of greeting her, his hand lingering a second too long on her elbow. I counted that touch like a mark on a ledger. We were introduced to half the room. Smiles, small talk, the choreography of people with something to prove. I nodded, laughed when expected, lifted my wine in the right places. Underneath the tailored suit and calibrated smile, my phone sat in my inner pocket, its screen dark, but full of secrets. In the weeks before, I hadn't only followed them. I'd kept receipts, appointments, and photographs. I'd saved messages that read like a confession, late-night meetups, plans, intimacies written in a language of emoji and half sentences. I'd recorded a voicemail where Richard's laughter sounded like ownership. I had everything I needed to let the truth speak for itself. When a main course arrived, conversation turned to triumphs, promotions, mergers, networks. Richard gave one of those speeches about leadership, slick and polished. He put his hand on Lauren's back, as if to include her in his triumph. The room applauded. That was my cue. "Richard," I said, voice steady enough to cut through the murmur. "I want to propose a toast." Everyone turned. Those who didn't know me watched with curiosity. Those who did wondered what would spill. I raised my glass in the same ritualistic gesture everyone loves, the illusion of civility. "To honest work," I said, "and to people who don't hide what they are." Polite claps fluttered out like falling birds. Richard's face tightened a fraction. Lauren's smile wavered. I set my glass down and pulled my phone from my pocket. I didn't flinch when it lit up. I didn't look for permission. I stood, walked to the small speaker by the host's side table, and tapped play. The room filled with Richard's voice, candid, amused, flirty, captured in a conversation he thought private. He joked about keeping it discreet and how public appearances were just for the cameras. Then another voice, softer, unmistakably Lauren's, chuckled and replied with something that felt like a promise and a dare. You could see the shift, the way a magician's audience gasps when the trick is explained. Heads leaned forward. Silverware clinked and fell silent. Richard's smile thinned until it was nearly gone. "What is that?" he demanded. But the question was lost under the weight of the recording. Lauren's face drained of color. She sputtered about context and jokes and how it was taken out of context. I could have played the righteous husband, yelled, broken things, demanded apologies. But I wanted the reveal to be surgical. I walked up to the buffet, opened my jacket, and placed a folder on the table with its brass clasp facing the room. The papers inside were neat. Calendar entries showing their meetups, screenshots from her phone with timestamps that matched Richard's out-of-office notices, and a photograph of them taken in public. Both laughing, breathless, his hand at the small of her back in a way that didn't belong to a boss and subordinate. "You two have been very good at pretending," I said, voice even. "But the pretense only lasts as long as people believe it." I collected a few things for anyone who cares to see. Silence tightened like a noose. Then a ripple. Someone gasped. Someone else murmured, "Oh my God." Richard's jaw worked. "Daniel, you don't," he began. I raised a hand. "Let me finish. I'm not interested in ruining careers. I'm interested in the truth." I looked at Lauren. "Do you remember that Thursday night in May when you said you had an audit? You weren't here. You were at Lovard with Richard. Here's the receipt." I slid a credit card slip across the table. "And here's a message you sent at 11:12 p.m. that says, 'Can't wait. Be careful, the wife's suspicious.'" Lauren's face crumpled, then hardened, the way a mask snaps back into place. She tried to laugh it off, but the laughter sounded small and hollow in the room. "Daniel," she hissed, furious and ashamed all at once. "You had no right." "Oh, I had every right," I replied. "You promised me a partnership. You promised to love me even on bad days. You promised to tell the truth. Instead, you chose charades." My voice didn't break. I let the room judge, and they did, quietly at first, then with a growing chorus of dismay. But the evening's purpose wasn't only to humiliate. It was to reveal. I wanted people to see who Richard was, not the polished mentor image, but an opportunist. So I paused, then pulled out one more thing. A file with a letterhead from his company that suggested something far worse than an affair. In it, Richard had authorized funds to be moved under the guise of consulting, money that, according to the small print, was being channeled to a consultant who shared Lauren's maiden name. The room's temperature changed. People shifted. "Is that?" someone whispered. Richard's face collapsed. He tried to reach for the papers, to explain, but everyone's eyes were knives now. Colleagues, acquaintances, the people who'd laughed at our joke an hour ago. For the first time that night, Richard was the one feeling exposed. Lauren, finally freed from the adrenaline of deflection, looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. "Why?" she asked, lower than a whisper. "Because I was tired of being the punchline," I said. "Because I want my life back." Her tears started then. Not the dramatic sobs that make for soap operas, but the quiet, raw kind that comes when the applause stops and the lights get too bright. She tried to reach for me, But I stepped back. The room didn't know which way to look. Some faces were sympathetic. Others were morbidly curious. A few, the ones whose loyalties lay with Richard, stared at me like I had committed a crime. In the hush that followed, I realized this wasn't revenge yet. This was the opening move, the first knock that would lead to doors opening, to people choosing sides. I had pulled a thread. Now I would watch how the whole tapestry unraveled. I sat down, poured myself more wine, and let the silence settle. The night had been changed. Nothing would ever be the same. By morning, the story had spread through the office like wildfire. I didn't post a thing. I didn't have to. People talk, especially when the gossip tastes like scandal wrapped in power. Richard was on leave. That was the official statement. The truth? He was being quietly pushed out. His board didn't like bad press, and an affair with a married subordinate wasn't the kind of rumor they could bury easily. Lauren tried to salvage what was left of her image. She called me that night, her voice trembling but still rehearsed, like she was trying to control the damage instead of the heartbreak. "Daniel, please, can we talk? It's not what you think." I almost laughed. "You've had plenty of time to explain what it was. I just didn't want to interrupt your meetings." Her breath hitched. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." "No," I said softly. "You humiliated us. I just stopped protecting your version of the story." There was silence, the kind where you could almost hear her pride cracking on the other end of the line. Then she whispered, "I made a mistake." I sighed. "No, Lauren. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. What you did was a decision, made over and over again." She didn't reply after that. The line went dead, but I knew the conversation wasn't really over. People like her never accept an ending they didn't write. For weeks, I focused on rebuilding what she'd quietly taken from me. Not just trust, but self-worth. I poured myself into my work, hit the gym again, spent time with friends I neglected. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected her name, but I didn't block her. Not yet. I wanted her to see what a man looks like when he stops orbiting someone else's life. Then came the unexpected part. Richard's wife, Claire, reached out to me. Her message was polite, almost too composed. "I think we need to talk. You deserve to know what I found." We met at a small cafe. She arrived in a gray coat, calm and dignified, but there was something steely in her eyes. A woman betrayed, yes, but not broken. "I've been collecting things too," she said, sliding a small USB drive across the table. "Emails, transfers, proof of company misconduct. It's bigger than just an affair." I frowned. "Why give this to me?" "Because you started what I couldn't," she said. "I don't want him walking away clean. You exposed the lies. Now let's expose the corruption." For a moment, I just stared at that tiny piece of plastic. It represented everything Lauren and Richard had risked for power, and everything they were about to lose because they underestimated me. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted closure, but if justice was the path to it, then so be it. 2 weeks later, Richard's leave of absence became a resignation. His wife filed for divorce. Investigations opened quietly behind closed doors. Lauren was let go, officially for a breach of ethics, though everyone knew the real reason. I never gloated. I didn't need to. Watching her facade collapse was enough. The last time I saw her, she came to our house, or what used to be ours. She stood on the porch, eyes red, clutching a small box of photos. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, "but I needed you to know you were the only person who ever believed in me." I looked at her for a long time before answering. "And you were the only one who made me stop believing in myself. We're even now." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and walked away, heels clicking softly on the pavement until the sound disappeared into the quiet. I closed the door, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than noise. For months, the house had echoed with arguments, fake apologies, and laughter that didn't belong to love anymore. But now it was quiet, peaceful, almost sacred. I remember sitting on the back porch one evening, coffee in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The yard looked the same, but I didn't. Something inside me had shifted. The man who once kept the peace at any cost was gone. In his place stood someone who finally understood that love without respect is just captivity in disguise. Lauren had moved out of the city. Word had it she was living with her sister, trying to rebuild her life. I didn't wish her pain. I didn't wish her anything at all. She'd become a lesson I needed, one I wouldn't forget, but one I no longer had to relive. When I met Claire again for coffee a few weeks later, she seemed lighter too. Her divorce had finalized quietly, and she'd taken control of her half of Richard's investments. You know, she said, stirring her drink, when people betray us, they think they're winning something. But really, they're losing the version of us that would have stood by them through anything. I nodded. Yeah, they trade gold for glitter. She smiled. Exactly. We didn't talk about revenge or heartbreak that day. We talked about life, travel, work, music. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something real, untainted by lies. Claire wasn't a replacement for Lauren. She was proof that trust can still exist, even after it's been shattered. At work, things changed too. My colleagues looked at me differently, not with pity, but with respect. I had become the quiet story that circulated in whispers, the man who'd walked into a dinner full of liars and walked out holding the truth. One Friday afternoon, my boss called me in his office. "You've been through a storm," he said, "but you never lost your composure. That's the kind of steadiness this company needs." He offered me a promotion, one that had been out of reach for years while I'd been too busy keeping someone else's world from collapsing. I accepted it without hesitation. Driving home that evening, I thought about the night at Richard's house, the wine, the laughter, the humiliation. That night had been my breaking point, but it was also my turning point. Sometimes, destruction clears the path for rebuilding. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. No name, just an address written in Lauren's handwriting. Inside was a single note. "I finally understand what you meant. That stability doesn't come from money or power or image. It comes from peace. I hope you found yours." I folded the letter, set it aside, and smiled faintly. I didn't need closure from her. I already had it. But knowing she'd learned something from the wreckage, that was enough. That night, I raised a quiet toast to no one but myself. Not out of pride, but gratitude. For surviving. For walking away without bitterness. For finally understanding that revenge isn't about ruining someone else's life. It's about reclaiming your own. The truth was simple. She had turned me into a joke once. But in the end, I became the story she couldn't laugh about. And as I sat in that peaceful house, the same walls that once echoed with betrayal now carried something far more powerful. Silence, yes, but a silence that belonged entirely to me.